Hi there, I'm Jill Beck, founder of Go Long, which is a wellness consultancy and matchmaking service. We provide matchmaking service to help you find a wellness program that fits into your lifestyle, whether that be fitness, diet, or stress management. I'm really happy to have with me as my first podcast guest, Melissa Bloom, who is the founder of Full Bloom Coaching.
Thanks, Jill. I'm happy to be here today and excited to see your podcast launch. And as Jill said, I'm the founder of Full Bloom Coaching, where I focus on working with leaders who are looking to do things a little bit differently. People who want to see more collaboration in their teams, people who want to feel a better sense of ownership and balance, both at work and outside of work. And so what I really do is work with people to help highlight their strengths, get clear on what they're looking to drive in terms of impact, and then help them turn those ideas into action.
Right. And I think that what we're both hearing about, likely from different lenses, is around the amount of struggle that people are having around maintaining good self-care practices and maintaining just their overall health, not just through the holidays, which are imminent, but just in general when things seem to be overwhelming. And it seems like overwhelming seems to be now more the standard as opposed to the exception.
Yeah. And so I think today we're going to build on that idea. If everybody's feeling overwhelmed, how can we present you all with a simple approach to breaking things down and, making some headway instead of feeling like you're carrying this really heavy pack and you're not going anywhere? How do we help you sort it out? So we're going to offer a 3-part process where we're going to flip things on their head and we're going to talk about, what does good look like? What are you going for in a certain situation, in a certain environment? And as you paint that vision of what you're trying to create, now we can begin to employ step 2, which is brainstorm your options. And you'll see as we go through some examples, we have a lot of options. And sometimes we don't consider them because we're so busy trying not to have the bad outcome, right? But now we're focused on what's the good outcome. What are the resources I have? And then the third step is turning those ideas into action and really deciding, what do I want to do that's going to help me make progress and move things forward?
Absolutely. It's really around working towards balance, but also understanding that balance can have flexibility and can even be fun, even in some of the most uncomfortable situations that we all encounter.
All right. So as promised, we're going to talk about some real world examples. So Jill, I'm going to ask you to just share some of what you've heard from clients and maybe even friends and family as well about some of the challenges people are facing.
Yeah, actually, a question came in from one of the subscribers of the Go Long blog. And really, it's around how do you maintain your health and wellness with all of the parties and the eating and the drinking and staying out late. And a lot of times, it's like the best of times and it's the worst of times, right? And you're excited to see people you don't see as often. And sometimes you're even dreading spending time with people that you have to spend time with, but you don't want to spend time with. And again, the healthy habits come into play. And then you might be staying with family, and that brings its own set of challenges. So there's that. And then, oh, by the way, you may be in a job where work doesn't really care about the holidays, and you need to figure out how you're going to handle all of that while still taking care of yourself.
Yeah. So it sounds like people are kind of struggling with what you talked about in our introduction, which is balance. And it sounds like maybe a key theme is balance in the context of, how do I keep myself healthy? Is that kind of how you're hearing it?
Yeah, physically and mentally.
Yeah. Okay. So now if we're going to link this to the process we outlined earlier, is, what could good look like for somebody if we're asking our clients to take the step of step back, take a breath, and just talk about what good could look like? How might that show up?
I think a great way where I tell people to focus on is, what can you control in this situation and what is your priority? And that you actually have more agency than you think you do. So let's give an example of eating and drinking. Perhaps you could be drinking more water throughout the day and also eating less earlier in the day, or eating healthier and being more mindful about what you're consuming in the first part of the day. So that this way in the evening, when you may be more prone to having unhealthy foods or having, a cocktail or two, you've already built that into your day. So that's one example. Another example is around sleep and relaxation, which obviously we all know impacts your mental health and your physical health. So it's a matter of reflecting, how do you want to show up? How do you want to represent yourself? And are you putting yourself in a good position mentally and emotionally to present yourself in a way that you would be happy with? Another way is thinking about fitness and how you're going to focus on maintaining any fitness regimens that you have. And perhaps that's, making sure that you're getting home early enough from a cocktail event so that you can work out the next morning. And then finally, the other thing is that you don't have to say yes to everything, right? You don't have to say yes to going to every event, or you don't have to say yes to having an extra cocktail. You can choose what you want to do. And I think, that really shows around like you're reflecting on what's going on. And then you're pausing to think about, I do have more control over this, right? To your point about the process. And then you're setting a boundary around like, I don't have to go to every event, or I can leave this event at 9:00 at night and I could still get a good night's sleep. So that's some of the things that I think could be helpful for this time of year and throughout the year in terms of when you're feeling like everybody wants a piece of you.
Mm-hmm. So I think a couple of things I wrote down a couple of words as you were speaking, is when we're asking people to think about what good looks like, it could be good looks like I have agency. It could be good looks like I feel like I'm maintaining some semblance of my health routine or schedule. And so you really, I kind of illustrated for people that defining what good looks like can be very simple. And doesn't have to be a lot of detail, but is kind of that guiding principle that, helps you when the times are more difficult.
Exactly. I think the more you could just realize that the weight of the world is on your shoulders, the better position you're in to be successful.
Yeah. So step 2 of the process, you kind of walked people through a little bit as well, which is, really brainstorming. What are my options? What resources might I have? So I heard you mention a couple of things in the context of eating and drinking. You can think about time, and earlier in the day, you eat maybe more healthful foods, knowing that at night you're going to be dining out. You talked about thinking about like, how do you want to maintain your fitness, where can you squeeze in a short workout? But let's continue on this theme of, how do you think about brainstorming options? Like, what might be some resources that people have at their disposal that they might be overlooking?
Yeah, one of the things that I think that people should be looking at is around the fact that you have a plan with a repeatable process. So like a daily check-in, right? And what you do is that you're figuring out, like, we've already broken down things that you can make it not so overwhelming. We've talked about that. So then once you've broken that down, have a daily check-in with yourself, whether it's first thing in the morning when your head, might be the sharpest, where your thinking is the most crystal clear. Maybe it's midday once you've gotten the cobwebs out and, you're in a better headspace. But make sure you have a plan with a repeatable process where you're checking in and you're like, okay, how did I sleep? How am I eating today? Am I drinking enough water? Did I get in the exercise, or did I have my mindfulness time? How much of that did I do? You're not going to do that every day. You're not going to check all the boxes every day, most likely. But if you're able to check most of those boxes on a consistent basis, you're in a really good place.
Yeah, and one other idea I'll throw out for inclusion is think about, who could be your human resource? Who could be the person that you check in with? Or maybe there's someone that you typically walk with. Can you still walk with that person? Maybe you're someone who benefits from doing an exercise class that involves a group because it gets you out of your house. I think we sometimes think we have to do it all ourselves. And there are a lot of resources out there, particularly in the form of other people that we live with and engage with regularly, that can be really helpful. And they don't have to be, real strict accountability partners. Like, I don't have to call you and say, Jill, did you, get 20 minutes of movement today? It doesn't have to be that black and white, but it sometimes can be helpful to have someone who's your partner. And throughout the holiday season, when you're going to all these different events, you might even have a different buddy at different times or different events.
Yeah, for sure. I think that people kind of get overloaded with their Apple Watch telling them they need to move more all the time, where it may be just as simple as going for a walk with a neighbor when you're walking your dog, right? And getting outside and something like that. And then maybe it's when you're going to a party, if you're going to a party with a friend or your partner, be like, all right, here's the cutoff. This is when we're agreeing that we're going to leave, and let's hold each other accountable to that.
Yeah.
So to the point, it doesn't have to be the same person. It could vary based on the situation.
Mhm. So we've talked about thinking about what does good look like. We've brainstormed a lot of different ways you could tackle some of these challenges. And then, the third part of the process is really like, what action will you take? Where do you see clients having the most success turning their ideas into action?
Writing it down and setting a calendar reminder, things of that nature, and just thinking about like, okay, because I think that people that we deal with, they work off of their calendars quite a bit. And when it becomes something on their calendar, it becomes a lot more tangible, right? And it doesn't have to be a long and involved thing. It could just be a quick cue that kind of just reminds you like, hey, have you, how much water have you had today? Right? Have you eaten lunch today? I was talking to someone yesterday and they were talking about how they forget to eat sometimes. And then they maybe don't make as good decisions later on in the day because they're sitting at their desk all day. So having that reminder and putting in like a 15-minute break to say, okay, I need to go downstairs and get some food so that I can eat and make good decisions later, that could be something where that could be very effective for people, especially people who are tethered to their calendar during the workday.
Mm-hmm. The last thing I'll add is don't forget to recognize the wins that you have, right? You were saying you had to ask someone like, did you eat lunch today, right? Maybe that becomes a reminder. It's just asking yourself the question of what am I excited about getting into my day? And just knowing that one thing is perfect. It doesn't need to be 2, 3, 4, 5 things. Just one thing means you prioritize something and you took an action for yourself, which is going to make you show up better for everybody else.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes you have to just take the small wins, and the small wins help you build to the bigger wins. That's what I've seen time and time again.
Yeah. So, Jill, I think you and I both receive a lot of questions about work and how to manage things at work, which can be related to the holidays and can just happen throughout the year when people are just feeling busy and maybe even overwhelmed. So, kind of how would you characterize some of the things you've been hearing recently from clients?
This one question came in from a client, and I think it could be applicable to a lot of what I talk about on a daily basis with other clients, is that, people feel like they're under siege at work. They're being assigned multiple number one priorities, and they don't feel that they have the power to explain to their leadership that they can only do so many things at once, even though they've gotten consensus on priorities, but then priorities change like flash in the pan, and people are just trying to figure out like what's what. And they're looking for suggestions on how to manage this for their own health and well-being, in addition to also keeping their job. Since for a lot of people, they're under a constant stress threat of being laid off, or they are worried about a spouse being laid off, and they have budget constraints.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the themes that we often hear about is when they're asked to juggle these things, they feel like they have to multitask. That's a common word I hear coming up. How about you?
All the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a quick exercise I think we could do to demonstrate to people the impacts of multitasking. We often perceive it as being something we are seeking to be able to do, but I think there's a counter argument that says maybe this isn't where we're headed. So I'm going to ask you to do 3 things in total, and I'm going to keep a timer going here on my desk in front of me. So it's a pretty straightforward direction. I'll give you the direction, we'll do it, and then we'll repeat that process. So I'm going to ask you to count up to 10, just one at a time, in a pretty rapid fashion. Start anytime you're ready.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay, that was about 5 seconds for you to count from 1 to 10. So I would call that a single task. It's focused on one topic, which is numbers. So now I'm going to ask you to do something similar. I'm going to ask you to recite the alphabet from A to J in a similar fashion, relatively quickly, but not killing yourself. Start when you're ready.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J.
Okay, so that was about 5 seconds as well, maybe 5.5. So again, these are two distinct tasks. Each one of them took you 5.5 seconds. So we're talking about 10 or 11 seconds total. Now I'm going to ask you to multitask, which means we're literally trying to thread these together or weave them together. So I'm going to ask you to move through that same sequence. So you'll say A1 and then proceed through the letters and numbers all the way through J and 10. So begin when you're ready, please.
Okay. A1, B2, C3, D4, E5, F6, G7, H8, I9, J10.
Okay. So in that case, it was more like 12 seconds, maybe even 13. And I think both you and I, but certainly our audience could probably see that A1, B2 is relatively quick. When you start getting to the HIJ, there's a little bit more of a pause. And so what happened there was something that took you 5 seconds and something that took you 5 seconds for a total of 10 now took you 12, 13, maybe even 14 seconds. So when you combine or try to multitask, meaning you're making the two blend together, it really increases the time that it takes. It may also lead to errors. In this case, it was a pretty simple, A through J, 1 through 10. Most of us aren't going to make too many errors on that, but think about something more complex, right? If you're dealing with a financial spreadsheet and then looking at a product spec and you're trying to somehow weave those two together, there's a lot of room for some maybe small, but certainly notable errors.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of people confuse multitasking with running parallel work streams. Do you find that as well?
Yes, I think that's very common.
And I think it's important that we can make the distinction between parallel work streams versus multitasking, right? And for me, multitasking is like you're trying to do multiple things in the moment, right? As opposed to running things in parallel tracks is that you can be, working on developing a product spec. You can be working on making sure that you get the financials of your model done. You can be working on talking to customers, but you're not trying to do them all at the exact same time. It's more about allocating discrete blocks of time to work on all three of those things to get them completed. What do you hear in your practice?
Yeah, what I hear a lot of is the word focus, that people want to be able to focus on one thing at a time, which gets to the discrete blocks of time that you just mentioned. And some of that is transitioning from project A to project B, both within the context of work, but sometimes it's even something different, right? Like it could be as simple as I'm working on a project and then I've got to squeeze the dentist appointment in, and the dentist just doesn't want to see me at 10 p.m., right? So it's kind of this switching back and forth. But to your point, it really comes about thinking about how you can allocate blocks of time so you give yourself enough time to sort of immerse yourself in a certain topic or a project.
Yeah, I agree. I find that I'm much more productive and I feel like I have a better sense of accomplishment when I have those focused time blocks in my calendar to just really crank out the things that I need to crank out for Go Long.
Yeah. So now we've kind of gotten to an example of like how to tackle the problem. Let's take a step back and just think about walking people again through our process where we're going to look at what good looks like, brainstorm some options, and then take an action. So what are you hearing? Let's go back to this work example where someone's feeling sort of under siege, overwhelmed, too many competing priorities. What does good look like in those sorts of scenarios?
I mean, really, it's around figuring out the priorities that are must do, knowing that it's very hard in practice to have multiple number one priorities.
Okay. So our goal, our objective is to say what's a must have, right?
Exactly.
So what are some of the ways people could think about this? If we're brainstorming both options and resources, what might come up for people?
First thing that comes to mind is setting the expectations, right? And you have two sides of that equation. Who is dependent on you, and who are you dependent upon? What are you giving and what are you receiving? And having that understanding can help you figure out how you need to organize your time. Another thing that I like to tell people from my previous life is that you're part of a system, you're part of a community. So the great part about that is that you're not alone. But the flip side of that is that in order to benefit from that community, you need to invest in that community. And that means you need to take a step back to communicate and coordinate. And this may include delegation. And I think sometimes people are afraid of taking any step back, even if it means that they will move much more forward than if they just incrementally move forward little by little. And then the other thing that I would say is that, you have to, it's not just setting expectations with the people who are dependent on you or that you're dependent upon. It's really talking to your management team, right? And understanding, telling them to understand and respect the fact that you have boundaries, and that these are the boundaries that you are at work. And these are the boundaries that, for example, you're not going to be available because you're doing non-work related things that are very important to you. So I think that the most important takeaway from this is setting expectations. And there's just different ways around how you can set those expectations.
Yeah, I completely agree. Our expectations are key to success here. And two themes that I think sort of bookend that are being proactive, right? I mean, you talked about being part of a system. Well, who's in that system, right? Who do I actually need to talk to? And not sort of waiting or maybe hoping that something just falls off the to-do list.
Yeah, I hear there's a certain company in Seattle that will remain nameless, but they say hope is not a strategy, right?
Right.
And so it's incumbent upon you, again, you have more agency than you think, to go and set those expectations and set those boundaries, because no one will set them for you. And if you don't set those boundaries can be set by you in a different way, meaning your health completely suffers. And then you have a very different problem that you're contending with.
Yeah. Yeah, and the close partner to that proactivity that I hear you talking about is the clarity, right? If the expectations are going to arise for the situation, whether action is overtly taken or not. But when you identify who's involved, who's an input, who's an output, where are the dependencies, and you talk about communicating these expectations, I just hear clarity, right? Now we know who's involved, we know what we're doing, when we're doing it, and we can hold one another accountable. And for the stuff that's not on that priority list, if we go all the way back to the beginning, which is there's too many priorities and we've got to identify the must-haves, we have to communicate that to the whole group. So we all say, okay, we picked these 2 out of 7 or these 3 out of 8 kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that if you try and get everything done in a really short period of time and then you don't do it well, then you're going to be dealing with a different problem. You're not going to feel good about the quality of the work that you're doing, and other people are not going to feel as connected to what the work has to be for whoever the stakeholders are, whether it's an external stakeholder or an internal stakeholder.
Yeah.
So being more focused and doing what you do and doing it well will lead to a better sense of satisfaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's close it here on our process. So the goal is to figure out what are the must-haves. When we're talking about our options for how do we go about doing this and what are the resources we have, we identified all the people in the system. We identified expectations as being critical to get clear and consistent agreement. And now we're saying, what action would you take? We've talked about talking to your boss, talking to your colleagues. Is there anything else you would say to kind of wrap it up about how to make that action successful?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's being creative in what you can and can't do. And that may mean entertaining some ideas that you think are likely not going to happen, but may spark some other ideas. So you may say to yourself, even though there's a budget constrained environment, I'm going to look into hiring two contractors to help us out, right? But you know that there's no budget for that. But maybe as you think that through, you might be able to say like, oh, there's someone in another group that I may be able to borrow, right? Because it's downtime for that team, so to speak. So it's just a matter of doing something like that. And I think with the holidays coming up, it is worth saying that if you are going to be out of the office, and this goes with any vacation, really set the table in terms of like, here's when you're going to be available. You're not going to be answering texts, emails, calls outside of your working hours, and demonstrating that consistency and setting that example is really important, because that's how you're going to build trust through your actions. And I know on Android, there are different ways to like snooze apps. I'm sure on iOS, there's ways to snooze apps, but those are tactics that I've used that I have found to be successful, so that this way I'm not getting pinged at all hours of the night, especially when you're working for a global company. You know, what during their day, they could be messaging you, but it's your sleep time. I don't want to get woken up by that. And they don't want to get woken up by the stuff that I'm doing during my workday.
Right. And I'm just going to call out one word that you really you used, but I want to highlight, and that is the trust, right?
Yeah.
Particularly when you are working with these global companies, when someone's working at 9 time zones ahead of you, you don't have a whole lot of direct real-time interaction. There's a lot of asynchronous communication, and trust is really key to say, Jill, I'm in France, you're in Seattle, but I trust that you're going to get your piece done when I go to bed tonight. And that consistency of action, the clarity of communication, setting the expectations, I think is really, really valuable. And we sometimes undersell the value of those critical pieces that take time and communication, but don't have that direct output of like, oh, here's a product launch. They're much more interpersonal in nature.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to mention is that when you're talking about what defines success, right? You're talking about the minimum amount of work that needs to be done by you in your absence was also completed, or by others during your absence. And a lot of people think minimum is like low bar in terms of quality. That's not what we're talking here. Minimum is just an acknowledgement that you and the team are only working on the tasks that absolutely had to get done while someone is out of the office, right? And so I think it's important to reframe what minimum means in terms of this example.
Yep.
Okay, Melissa, I don't know about you, but I'm hearing a lot of anxiety around family and relationships and this time of the year, and just with world events, and people just aren't sure how they want to act. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I'm hearing much the same. And like you said, it's a myriad of things, right? There's some world events that are very difficult and can also be really uncomfortable topics to talk with people about, particularly if you don't know where they stand. And then there's some real world personal issues, right? I mean, I personally just moved a couple of months ago. So some of the, kind of standard questions people ask are not the most exciting for me to answer, because things are still a little unsettled. But other people, you may be looking for work, and that job search may be challenging. You might be getting a divorce. You might be having some other sort of challenge come up. And I think you and I are both hearing these themes from people. And it's really kind of stems down to, I'm worried about what other people think of me, or I'm worried about what I think of myself when my answer to the question is X. And how do I not just go from holiday event to holiday event feeling bad about myself?
Yeah, it's something that I'm hearing so much about, and particularly both domestically and globally in terms of current events. And yeah, as someone who used to work in tech, I feel like my LinkedIn is just like pummeled with people looking for work right now and talking about how grueling the job search is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, if we go back to kind of our process and we start off with, okay, here's the basket that I'm holding with all this stuff in it. And what does good look like? And I think what I talk to people a lot about is, how do you define good in the context of these social interactions, right? And that might be a cocktail party. It might be a 4 or 5 hour family dinner. It might be a day where you have 3 or 4 events. Whatever the actual context is, what I encourage people to do is think about, how do you want to show up? Right? When you're defining what good looks like, and we've talked about this in some of our other examples, you want to focus on your own agency or level of control. And you can control how you show up in a situation. And I think that can help you decide when we're saying, what does good look like? It's kind of like, how am I showing up? What do I want to get out of this experience with family, friends, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it can be overwhelming for a lot of people, right? For so many reasons.
Yeah, and I think there's a good opportunity to sort of break it down into, maybe it's not every single event you go to, but maybe you kind of group them and say, okay, I have these 2, 3, 4 family events. How do I want to show up there? Why do I want to go? Right. And it could be something like, I say, oh, I have this aunt that I only see at this dinner. And so that's what good looks like for me, is I get to see this person. You may be a parent and you may say, I'm going because I want my children to have a relationship with their grandparents or their cousins or what have you. But really focusing in on what's the reason, what's your why for going to these things? And then breaking it down when you need to. It doesn't have to be the monolith of every holiday event, but it can be, here's how I want to show up with these family members. Here how I want to show up with these friends, and making it something that you feel like, this is small enough that I can wrap my head around it. And I have some sense of control in how I'm thinking about it and how I'm acting when I'm there having the experience.
Definitely. I mean, Thanksgiving is 9 days away, right? And it's interesting, when you hear people are talking about worrying about these interactions now and even earlier. What are your thoughts on how to deal with that in terms of worrying about something that's in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, thinking about, what does good look like, right? So now you've set an objective, something that you're working towards. So the event is actually in the future, but you're also, making it something that you're drawn towards. I want to go because, and then really kind of the same thing that we followed in the process before is brainstorm your options. So I mentioned, oh, I want to go to this family event because Aunt Matilda is going to be there, right? That's an option. Aunt Matilda is sort of inadvertently my partner that day, right? She's my reason for going. But some other examples might be, oh, I'm going to this event with this friend or with my partner, and I'm going to share with them that I really don't have the stamina to be there for 3 hours. I'd like to try to leave in 90 minutes, right? Another option might be to just kind of think about, who are you trying to see in a day and how do you meter out your energy? So now you're sort of thinking in time blocks. But I think there's a lot of resources that we have that we forget because we get really focused on what we don't want. We don't want that negative conversation. We don't want to get pulled into a boring conversation. We don't want to be asked uncomfortable questions. So what I'm saying is flip the script. Think about what you do want. Feel yourself having some energy to move forward into that event, and then brainstorm the best ways that you can make that your reality and not just a hope.
I really like how you flip that, because a lot of people spend time worrying about a specific interaction that's going to happen at one of these events. And the reality is that it's not going to go away if you worry about it. So why waste the energy on that, as opposed to, as you say, look at the glass half full in terms of the positive engagement that you can have with, say, others at the event.
Mm-hmm. And you can always, one thing I just thought of is you can always think of like 2 or 3 questions that you actually like being asked. Sometimes people will ask really broad questions like, when you have free time and no constraints, what do you like to do? Or, have you been anywhere that you would love to go back or travel to, right? These are really broad questions. And so, if someone else asks you the question of how's your job search going that you don't really want to talk about, you can politely respond with an abbreviated answer, and then you can ask them a question. And really, we probably all know we like to talk about ourselves. And when we're offered this opportunity to talk about what we care about, what excites us, it's simpler to transition the conversation away from some topic that may be more uncomfortable for you.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that's really important is, another part of the wellness piece is carving out time for yourself when you can, right? So it could be going for a walk, taking a nap, hitting the gym. I mean, there are times where I've volunteered to run errands when I'm staying at someone's house, just so I can get out of the house and have some time for me and listen to some music in the car that makes me feel good. Yeah. So I think that's another trick that I've used in the past to help me, in these situations.
Yeah, we all have a pause button and we sometimes forget how to use it. And this reminded me of something someone shared with me one time. She had trouble in these situations when someone said something nice to her, like paid her a compliment, she struggled. And what she started doing was just kind of tapping herself on the hand just to say, it's okay. They're just giving you a compliment. You don't have to, do anything specific. You can just say thank you. But that's a tactile, a very, personal, physical reminder of what we have control over. So in your point, like you said, I chose to run the errands, but you can do something like that where you just, squeeze your pinky finger or, put your hand in your back pocket or something to remind yourself you have choice. You can pause and go outside and get some fresh air and come back, and no one's going to think anything less of you, and you're going to feel better and then be a better, friend or family member or partner to those people that you're with.
Yeah. And the other thing is that it's only temporary, right? Generally, these things are once or twice a year. So it's temporary. You get through it. And when you do get through it, you should be congratulating yourself. As you said earlier, celebrate the win.
Yep. Yeah, we do too little of that. If anything, if I'd like to have listeners go away with anything, I would say that's it. Don't forget to acknowledge the win.
Take the win. Just always take the win when you can.
Yeah.
All right. Final takeaways. Most important thing to think about is really reiterating the goal, which is about balance. And you have more control than you think, or you can make a choice and put it another way. And the first thing is to really understand that you have that ability to make that choice. Then I would say thinking about what does good look for you. And if you put it more in first person, it's I need to decide what I want. Then finally, making an investment does require some sacrifice. And the reality is that most of us learn more when things aren't easy. So thinking about that and knowing that making that investment is part of the process. Speaking of the process.
Yeah, so exactly. The process is there for a reason to help you, right? But it's not always easy. But we've tried to make it somewhat simple. So the first step is always looking at the situation and defining what does good look like, setting that vision of what you're working towards. Secondly, think about all of the different resources you have, and don't forget the people around you. You often have more people than you think who can chip in and lighten the load, as well as other resources like podcasts and articles and different tools and techniques you've learned over time. And then thirdly, now that you have this wealth of options, go ahead and choose a couple of things and take action. It will help you get a sense of accomplishment as you begin to make progress towards that vision. And if the first thing or two that you tried didn't get you all the way there, you still have a long list of other options. So defining what good looks like, brainstorming your options, and taking action. That's the simple process. And throughout the different examples that we've discussed, we gave you a few tips and tricks along the way. So the first was be proactive, right? When you feel overwhelmed, it's really easy to get stuck in the mud, right? Try to make some forward progress. Try to be proactive and engage with others as appropriate. Secondly, as you're thinking about engaging with others, clarity is key. Setting clear expectations, communicating clearly will go a long way. It's the upfront investment that Jill talked about. You're going to have a little bit of work, but it's really going to help you accelerate your progress as you all begin working together. And last, but absolutely not least, probably most important, celebrate your wins. You are going to hit many milestones along the way. You are going to learn things. You are going to make progress. Don't forget to pause and celebrate those wins as you go.
I think that's great advice, particularly taking the win. Just to wrap it up here, first of all, if you would like to talk about something more personalized or bespoke for your life, whether it's with Melissa or myself or the both of us, our contact information, they're in the show notes. We are going to have a joint Black Friday special, also will be in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. Please send in feedback. A lot of you will be receiving this via Substack, so you're able to hit the reply button on the email and you can send feedback, or you can just contact us through the show notes. And then I want to thank Melissa once again from A Full Bloom Coaching for joining me on this. Appreciate all of you listening to this inaugural edition of Go Long's podcast. And I'll just close out with, remember, it's your life. Go the distance, go long.